All right, to things outside of the Euros now. You might have seen walking around Dublin some stickers stuck to lampposts or things about on social media as well saying Save Tolka Park. That is a movement that has kicked up over the last couple of months and definitely ramped up over the last couple of weeks as well. And I'm delighted to say that John Mernock, who is part of the campaign to save Tolka Park, is on the line with me now. John, how are you getting on?
Enda, thanks for having me on. Cheers.
Yeah, delighted to have you. So I think a couple of weeks ago, I had a conversation with Ian O'Riordan about the walking history tour in Dublin, the football tour. And Tolka Park's a big part of that. Tolka Park's a big part of Irish football, especially that area. So I'm not surprised that this sort of movement has kicked up to save Tolka Park because it is a huge monument of Irish football. So I suppose before we get into what the campaign is and what it involves and what you're trying to do, I mean, how did you get involved in this campaign? Why are you trying to save Tolka Park?
Yeah, I suppose a bit of background of where the campaign came from, I suppose. So it's essentially a coalition of local residents, football fans, activists who, as you say, are trying to save Tolka Park. It's a near century old football stadium. So I think everyone on board appreciates that. It's got a fascinating history, not just football. There's some very quirky things went on in Tolka Park over the last century other than football. And I suppose I got involved myself mainly as a football fan. I am a Shelburne fan, so you mightn't be surprised. But I mean, as each day goes on, the campaign is becoming less, Shelburne focus and football focus, and broader than that as every day goes on, as we get more and more support. So I came on that basis, and I suppose to give a bit of summary of what we're arguing is for public land for public use, retention of green space in Dublin City around that area, which is diminishing all the time. And we see it as like there's an alternative vision for Tolka we're trying to put forward, that it's not just used by a League of Ireland football club. It's used by much broader spectrum of the football community, and it contains community facilities as well and becomes a bit of a community hub. So that's kind of our vision. That's why I got involved, because I support those ideas. And but I said primarily I was from a football perspective. It's got very, very special memories for me, but it's more than that. It's more than just football. It's more than just Shelburne.
Yeah, so I think that's a key point to make here, is that this campaign isn't trying to save this area or this stadium for nostalgic reasons. It's not just because there were a couple of European fixtures that were really good back in the day and Irish football played a few matches here. This isn't a nostalgia thing. This is a broader aspect to it. And I suppose the elephant in the room here is public housing, and that area could be used to develop public housing in an area that is very packed with residents and residents who need houses as well. And I guess with the housing crisis in Dublin, it's something that's going to be an issue for the campaign going forward. So I guess what would be your argument against using the public land for public housing as opposed to remaining a sporting hub?
Yeah, look, it's a fair question. And before I come to that, about the nostalgia point, I mean, yeah, it's certainly not just about nostalgia, but it is one element. I think it's very important to respect the heritage and history, the sporting history of Tolka Park. So I do say it is a little bit about nostalgia, but it can't just be about that. So in terms of what you're saying about public housing, and that's a fair point. I mean, we would make a few points in relation to that. So this is also about sustainable development of communities, and it needs to be green space, people to breathe. And I think COVID-19 has taught us that there's more of appreciation for recreational green space, and it's public land as well. And public land for public use has also been very topical, particularly in the last year or two. And the public discourse, I think, is changing in relation to that, and appreciative. In relation to the housing, I mean, I'm not sure how familiar. I think you're very familiar with that area, but there's a lot of land has been developed on, or is due to be developed on, for housing. So, for instance, around near Stella Maris, the Iron Club, St. Vincent's Hospital, Rossmini Lands, Hampton Carmelite Convent, Clonliffe College. Like there's a lot of developments that are either have gone on there or are planned to go on there. So that's one argument in terms of, we think it needs to be sustainable. We need space to breathe. And also in terms of, okay, if you say it's public housing, and obviously we would welcome public housing as opposed to being sold to private developers, but the plan is that the land would be sold to private developers because that's part of the Datamount project funding model. So it's not really realistic that it's going to be public housing, because part of the Datamount funding model, 15 million of it is from the sale of Tolka Park to private developers. So that would need to be re-examined if that was to happen anyway. So look, we believe there's arguments in relation to how it actually realistically is going to be used. And also we make a strong argument in relation to that, yes, we welcome housing, but it needs to be sustainable, and there needs to be amenities around for people to actually use. And that area is already very congested as it is, as I'm sure you know too.
Yeah, I guess if you think back to large developments of areas in Dublin, is like Ballymun, Santry, these areas in North Dublin in particular. I know South Dublin's a little bit different, but housing for housing's sake doesn't naturally work unless you have amenities, because if you think of those areas, you think of houses and nothing else, and that's one of the biggest downfalls off the area, is that there's no community hub. So I guess that's sort of what you're aiming for, is that the people in the area have more than just houses. They have something to get around, and a sporting club, and an area that can really be used as a community place.
Yeah, and I'll get to the benefits that we're envisaging with that now in a bit more detail. But just to add to the thing about housing, and look, I don't want to be, talking like Darragh O'Brien or Owen O'Brien here. Like I'm not a housing policy expert, but there was a recent FOI, I think from May of this year, which estimated that in the Dublin City Council area alone, there was over 4,700 estimated housing units that remained unbuilt on sites with development potential. So there's actually a lot of land that's there, and we would argue that the land that those potential units are on do not have the historic value or the potential future value from a sporting and community potential that Tolka Park has. So that would be an argument. We would say that, is this just an easy option? Have we really thought about what we're doing here? Where we have an existing facility there that has huge, historic significance, that can be so much more than it is, and we're just going to eradicate that. It just seems absolutely crazy to us. And in terms of how it's used going forward, as I said already, we accept that it shouldn't kind of be continued the way it is now. It needs to be far bigger use than that. So, for instance, we would envisage putting a hybrid surface in there, and that it's properly used more readily by the community. So what I mean by that is, there's a lot of local clubs. We've engaged with about 10 and possibly more in the future, local clubs in the area who could avail of that facility. For instance, Drums and Home Farm, who are two original tenants of Tolka Park. They are strongly on board. They've offered their support. They came to our launch night and spoke very positively about the campaign. They're crying out for facilities, and everyone, I think, assumes in the football community that Home Farm are this, prestigious big Dublin Irish junior football club, and they are. But Brendan Menton spoke at our launch night and explained how they're renting facilities way out from where they're based, because they don't have the space, they don't have the facilities to provide, sports facilities for their young kids or young adults as well. So Drums as well, who their heritage goes back a long way, and the Drumcondra AFC are already on board. Drumcondra FC as well have kind of been quite positive about this, and loads of other clubs who are looking to, come on board with us and see what we can offer. And then with the community hub, we're looking to open up a proper access to the River Tolka, have a community centre or community hub behind the Drumcondra end, which is quite unique. To have a whole end of a stadium dedicated to community facilities, and included in that, it could be whatever we want, but you could potentially have public toilets, which at the moment is very topical in terms of the lack of public toilets in the city, a creche, and we know the pressures on childcare in Dublin and across the country, a cafe, and any sort of a venue where you could host kind of coffee mornings for the elderly or for community groups, which we can never have too much of them either. So, and also an enterprise centre, so you could have offices there or kind of remote working areas, and obviously they're particularly needed at the moment. So there's so much you could do at that end, plus the actual sporting side of it, that it could actually truly become a community stadium, because it is owned by Dublin City Council. So in effect, it is the People's Stadium. And we actually, rather than just using those words, we should actually put that into action and make it a community stadium. Because at the moment, it isn't really at the moment. Let's be honest about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I actually play for Drumcondra AFC, so to get out of Albert College Park and into Tolka Park would be a nice little boost. And we also
off about that,
we also played Drumcondra FC. They have really nice facilities, but again, they're not remotely near Drumcondra. They're out by the airport. They're essentially they're like they're called Drumcondra in all but name, and that's it really, because they don't train in Drumcondra, they don't play in Drumcondra, so it really doesn't make sense at all to have two teams like that who clearly come from the same area, who want to play there, who just can't because the facilities don't exist. But let's get into the actual nitty-gritty of things then. So you guys you start putting forward this proposal, and it's in 3 phases. So I think it would be remiss of us not to mention the current state of Tolka Park, and I've done a couple of videos in Tolka Park as well, being there for matches. It's not in good condition. There's 2 stands that are out of use, both of them behind the goals, and the main stand needs a new roof as well. So there's a lot of work that would have to go into this to make it a reality. So I suppose from getting from where Tolka Park is at the minute to where you just wanted to be, it's not going to be a short-term process. So I guess if you want to take us through the proposal of what you guys want to do in the phases of it.
Yeah. Look, I'll try and go through it as high level as possible, but given a bit of detail. So, I mean, there is a narrative out there about Tolka Park, and look, of course, it's seen better days. It's a bit rough around the edges, but a key point to remember is that the 2 main stands at Tolka Park. So, the main stand, which is the Richmond Road stand, and then the Riverside stand on the opposite side, so the 2 sides of the pitch. We're of the strong belief and information we have is that they're actually structurally sound. Now, a lot of seats have been taken out of the Riverside because they were kind of in bad condition, and both stands we think need to be re-roofed. But if you were to re-roof and reseat those 2 stands and some general repairs, I mean, our costings are coming in about, and we've engaged with industry experts. We've got senior architects, quantity surveyors, and estimators involved. So this is not just thrown together by some local residents and football fans. We have actually, tested these and put them through the ringer. So you're talking 1.325 million for the reseating and re-roofing and general repairs for those 2 main stands. And if you were to bring them up to the Riverside back up to its kind of max capacity, you're talking 5,800 seats from those 2 stands alone, to those 2 existing structures. So that's not actually a massive investment. It's not a massive amount of work. And, capacity wise, in terms of, obviously for the local clubs, it's definitely fine. And for the League of Ireland clubs, I mean, 5,800 seats in itself is actually very good. So, I mean, that's one point. In terms of what we're looking to do in later phases, you're looking at demolishing or potentially demolishing the Drumcondra end for that community facility, which I talked about. But I mean, the benefits you would get from that community facility would be enormous. And, you would generate income on an ongoing basis as well, with the kind of business going in there, and also the pitch would with local clubs, that kind of low rental cost, paying for the ongoing upkeep of it as well. And then we're proposing a modest 840 seater stand at the Ballybuck end, and also providing for an access route behind that as well. And within that, there's some changing facilities and catering facilities and that kind of thing too. But I mean, yes, Tolka Park is not in its best state, but I mean, I think it's kind of just it's been let the narrative has been left formed that Tolka Park has to be completely bulldozed, and we just don't see that that's the case, and no one has been able to prove to us otherwise that actually is the case. But it's a convenient narrative because it reduces the idea that we should have not 2 stadiums, only 1 stadium on the north side of Dublin, and that knocking down Tolka would fund the new build of Dalymount Park. So, yes, to answer your question, it needs a bit of work, but to get it up to a decent standard, it's not going to be exorbitant amount of money.
And where is that money going to come from? Would that be Dublin City Council? Would there be funds? Is there an investor that you just might have on board, or where do you expect to get that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's a remiss to not bring Dalymount Park into the conversation here, because we are making the point that two refurbishments of those 2 stadiums, Tolka Park and Dalymount Park, 2 historic and really important stadiums in Irish sporting history, but over 2 centuries between them of stories to tell. we are asking questions about the Dalymount project in the sense that initially it was meant to be a 10,000 seater Category 4 20 million cost stadium, and now it's gone to a cost of 35.6 million before even a shovel's been put into the ground, or before design has been finalized. It's going to be a 6,000 seater stadium, and it's going to be a Category 3 stadium. So we're asking the question, firstly, is that value for money? And in the process, which wasn't originally part of the deal as well, was that Tolka Park has to be sold to fund that rebuild, which was kind of an add-on. So, I mean, we're asking the question: is that value for money? And especially when you're going from two potentially really valuable historic community stadiums to one, and it's not even a redevelopment; it's actually a new build. It's a complete demolition and new build, and you're losing a bit of heritage there as well, with it being completely new build. So, I mean, our proposal is honest and it's realistic from a cost perspective, in that we're not looking to go to the massive expense of a complete demolition and new build. It's refurbishment of both and trying to keep both of them alive. So in terms of cost, we're kind of looking at that cost in total to the taxpayer might come out at roughly the same. But in terms of where the sources would be, similar to, in some cases, to what the funding would be for Dalymount. So you're talking about the Large Scale Sports Infrastructure Fund, development levies, including from intensive developments nearby, potentially some co-op based fan investment. And also there's a post-COVID-19 recovery strategy plan that Dublin City Council have, and we would look to maybe get funding from that too. There's also what's called an Irish Immigrant Investor Programme, which we've looked into, and GAA have actually have used that and tapped into that as a funding source. We would look at the rentals I talked about for the, as part of the community facility, and that, local sports clubs, instead of Home Farm paying their rent to, further out from where they're based, and possibly at a higher cost, that they would give some minimal rent to, to keep up for the general upkeep of the stadiums as well. Because that's been a concern about the cost of maintaining two stadiums, but you could actually possibly make them self-sufficient on an ongoing basis. And then lastly, like in terms of an anchor tenant, we would see Shelburne as an anchor tenant of Tolka Park. And likewise, that Bohemians would continue to be an anchor tenant of Dalymount Park. So, look, we think it's realistic and honest, and that the benefits you're getting out of keeping those two stadiums alive is enormous.
And what's the estimated cost, roughly, do you know, for the three phases?
Sorry, yeah. So we have costed it at between, in total, 10.1 and 13.8 million. And the 10.1 is including a 10% contingency. And at 13.8 is up to a 50% contingency. So we've put our hands, cards on the table and said, look, contingencies are going to come in here potentially as high as 50%. But even in that scenario, you're talking less than 14 million for that refurb, because it is a refurbishment as opposed to like a rebuild and redevelopment. That's how we would see it. Okay.
And I suppose this is a question for further down the line, but it has to come into it as well when you're thinking about it. In terms of it being a community stadium, so Shelburne Women's, I believe, would play here as well as Home Farm, potentially Drumcondra. Most football games are on at the weekend. So how would it be divvied up in that sense? Can you envisage a sort of a backlog of people wanting to use it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you touched on the women, because I wanted to get to that as well. And we have that in our proposal very clearly, that we do have concerns about that, because at the moment, Shelburne men's first team and women's National League side play out of Tolka Park. I know Bohemians, generally speaking, their men's first team play in Dalymount Park, and their women's National League side play out of Oscar Traynor Road. So we also are understanding that the WNL side haven't really been considered in terms of the move to Dalymount Park, and we would strongly have major fears that the WNL sides would be forgotten in all this, and they'd end up playing in substandard venues. And the women's game has come on massively in the last couple of years, and it would be a massive step backwards if that was to happen. So that would be a concern we would have. In terms of how you would divvy it up and how it would be used by the local clubs, I mean, we have to remember we'd be going from a scenario where they're not used at all by these local clubs, to potentially having, say, if it was a hybrid pitch, 30 to 40 hours a week. And that would be if you have, say, a team training, you could have multiple teams training on that surface, divided it 4 or 3 or whatever way you divide it up. So obviously that would take a bit of management. But if you think you could have, as I said, 30 to 40 hours, but that's obviously could be multiplied depending on the use of the surface during the week for training and stuff like that, you would get many multiples of that. And that would give much more than what we're getting now, which is, as you said, teams playing out by the airport that are from Drumcondra, which is just madness. But yeah, at the weekend, it would be more of a challenge in terms of matches for junior clubs, obviously. And that's how it's managed in, as you know yourself, Albert College or St. Anne's Park, where the certain teams share pitches and one team's on at 12 o'clock and other teams at 2 o'clock. I mean, you would have a similar thing to that. Now, people might be fighting for the best slots, but I mean, it's certainly workable. And considering what we have now, to have teams playing in a stadium like Tolka Park compared to St. Anne's Park is a much better option, we would think.
Yeah, I didn't want to dismiss the nostalgia element earlier when I was talking about it. Okay. So let's get into the nostalgia element of it, because I guess for Shelbourne fans, this means the world, because it's the home for many of them of where Shelbourne come from. And those European nights in the early noughties and the successful Shelbourne years, they may not be as successful as they are now, but it definitely still means something to them. And even if you think back to last year, the year before that, when they got promoted to the Premier Division and the celebrations on the pitch afterwards, it still holds a deep part of people's hearts. So I guess that is something that you want to restore and keep a hold of as well, because as Dublin develops even further, hotels just seem to keep coming up and different. It's losing its soul a little bit. So I feel like maybe Tolka Park should be part of the thinking in people's minds for keeping a bit of soul in North Dublin as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and again, like obviously the latest chapter in Tolka Park is largely centered around Shelbourne. They moved there in 1989. So for myself as a Shelbourne fan, it's the only home I know. And for obviously people who been supporting Shelbourne longer than me, like it's the stadium that they've gone to the most, because Shelbourne have been playing there for so long. So obviously it's very special in that sense. But we do want to stress that we do feel it's a lot bigger than that. I mean, like Tolka Park is 1924 was the first match played in Tolka Park. So we're talking nearly a century. So, it's a massive history there. And I think with Tolka Park, there tends to be this accepted narrative that, well, it's not that significant, compared to Lansdowne Road or Dalymount Park. But we would strongly argue against that. And it's been kind of let happen that Tolka Park has kind of been dismissed in terms of its heritage. And we're trying to talk about it more and more. I mean, you go back to the great drum sides of the 40s, 50s and 60s, as I mentioned, Home Farm as well. Like there's been cup finals, senior and junior. There's been internationals, men and women. There's been Rugby League World Cup internationals. There's been Arkle paraded around the turf of Tolka Park. There's been the Harlem Globetrotters. I mean, the history is incredible. There's been boxing bouts there. So, I mean, just to eradicate that, I mean, what's that saying about us? As you say, the soul of Dublin. If we just say, okay, well, that's the easy option. Let's just bulldoze this amazing place of incredible heritage. And the phrase has been used. It was on the Irish Times newspaper headline, and it was from Shane Dawson, who's a part of our campaign, and he referred to it at our launch night as cultural vandalism. And that's how we would see it. And it sounds very dramatic, but I mean, that's as strong as we feel about it. And as I said, it's got a lot of history, but I think that what we could actually have for it in the future could be actually even better.
What's the next steps then? How do people get involved in the campaign, and what is the next steps essentially for this campaign, Save Tolka Park?
Yeah, I mean, like we only launched this day last week, so it's quite new. Obviously, we've been working on our plans. We have a very, very detailed proposal on our website on savetolkapark.com. So we've been building to that. We've been talking to local residents, individuals and resident groups, local clubs, local representatives, councillors, TDs, senators, etc. So there's been a lot of engagement going on, and we're going to continue to engage. We've met with pretty much almost all of the political parties and independents as well. trying to sell what our vision is. So we have a petition of about 4,000 people now at this stage. That's growing as well. We have a tool on our website for people to send emails or correspondence to their local representatives, be it within Dublin City Council or otherwise, to argue against the sale and the rezoning of Tolka Park. Because I said Tolka Park is currently zoned as a recreational green space, and the plan is for it to be rezoned and then sold to private developers. So we would strongly be encouraging Dublin City councillors to abide by their own principles they've set. So there's what's called the Dublin Agreement, which was signed in 2019, which basically puts a stop on the sale of public land unless there's an extraordinary circumstance or case to be made. And there's precedents where proposed sales have been rejected. So that's what we're strongly looking to push back on. And it's not just a proposal to push back on and say, well, let's keep the status quo. We're also coming to the table with a realistic plan and with far greater use for the community, both sporting and otherwise. So, I mean, people want to get involved. You can get in touch with us, savetolkapark.com. There's contact information there. There's social media links. As I said, there's a petition we'd love people to sign. And we've got great support from not just, as I said, Shelbourne fans or even the junior clubs or local residents, etc. But we've also got great support from across the League of Ireland base as well. You know, people who've fans of different clubs who've had great nights in Tolka, and that they just appreciate the history of the place as well. So, you know, get in touch with us via our website and social media, and look, talk, you know, campaign, canvass and lobby your local TDs and councillors and say that we should be saving this amenity.
Good stuff, John. Thanks very much for joining me today. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, you can get on the Save Tolka Park website, or I'll drop a link in the podcast below and on the social channels as well. I'll share that on Team 33 as well. John Mernock, thanks very much.
Thanks, Enda. Appreciate it.